Chosen one. Before titles or timelines, before questions try to turn feeling into evidence, there is a quiet vote inside her that never happens out loud. Call it the interior compass. It does not argue, it aligns. It does not consult a panel, it remembers. When you step into a space, without trumpets, without any announcement larger than your breath, this compass swivels and steadies as if it has finally located north after a long stretch of magnetic noise. She senses the adjustment first in small places. The way her shoulders release half a thought of tension she didn't know she was carrying. The way her eyes stop scanning for exits and begin looking for conversation. The way silence stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like soil. You did not engineer this with slogans or strategies. You carry it because you keep your interior weather honest. There is a steadiness in you that has learned the dignity of pace, the usefulness of restraint, the mercy of accuracy. A person can feel when someone's warmth is governed, when appetite is not hunting for a host, when attention arrives to witness instead of to harvest. The body always knows, so her body knows. And where the body trusts, the mind is finally free to think in full sentences. And the heart finally remembers that it can sing in its chest voice instead of performing falsetto to be heard. In that recognition, something deeper than preference moves. She does not elevate you to the top of a scoreboard. Scoreboards belong to games she has outgrown. The shift is more sacred and more ordinary. You become the reference point. Errands, noise, reputation, the long queue of half-urgent tasks, all of them rearrange, not because you asked, but because her own clarity has found a chair. This is what it means to be the number one agenda in the language of the soul. The calendar inside her stops chasing and starts keeping time around what returns her to herself. Your presence turns the scattered list into an order that breath can live inside. This is not idolatry. It is orientation. And orientation is won by stewardship, not spectacle. When you speak, your words carry the weight of distance traveled in silence. When you listen, your listening has a back to it. It does not collapse when a story becomes inconvenient to your image. When you choose, your choices are measured to fit tomorrow, not just to dazzle today. She notices. Her instincts, long trained to read the small print beneath grand gestures, find no hidden fees. Risk loses its appetite. She can feel the difference between a man creating a scene and a man creating a setting. Scenes are expensive and unrepeatable. Settings feed life. Preparation for a moment like this is subtle. It is not about rehearsing lines or curating angles. It is the older practice of arriving with your interior furniture in order. The chair for truth is not wobbly. The table for questions is cleared of clutter. The window for humor opens. The door for no and the door for yes both swing freely on their hinges. You have done this work in rooms where no one clapped. That is why when she meets you, her compass does not hesitate. It recognizes craftsmanship. It recognizes promise kept small enough to carry. It recognizes hearth, not bonfire, harbor, not storm. Do not mistake the quiet of this recognition for lack of power. Quiet arrangements move the world. A tree is quietly arranging light into fruit every day without applause. So she arranges her day around the light you keep. Plans that once competed for her attention recede like a tide that knows its time has passed. Conversations that fed on spectacle lose their flavor. She does not become less, she becomes exact. The excess falls away, as if it were always waiting for a better gravity to belong to. There will be those who misread this. They will say she made you a prize. They will not see that she made you a place. Places do not demand competition, they invite arrival. In your place, her intelligence sharpens without becoming cruel, her softness deepens without becoming porous, her devotion grows without turning into debt. The chosen ones are always places before they are projects. They are standards before they are stories. To be the number one agenda, in truth, is to be the standard a life uses to keep its wholeness from scattering. If you need a liturgy for such an hour, let it be simple. Inhale until your breath reaches the back of your attention. Exhale until your presence reaches the edges of the room. Let your gaze return what it touches back to itself intact. Let your voice arrive at a temperature words can endure. Ask nothing of the moment that you have not first asked of yourself. And then stand, not to summon, but to be found by what already belongs with you. The compass will do the rest. It always does. Chosen one, to be a standard is not to be a ruler in your hand. It is to be a measure written into your way of being. A standard is what other things learn to fit by, not what other people are beaten with. You set it without ceremony. You keep it without a crowd. That is why in her eyes you do not simply come first. You are what first means. She has known heights with views that stole her breath and bills that arrived later. She has known promises so large they eclipsed her, and apologies so loud they could not be trusted. Then she meets your quiet consistency and understands that value is not volume. It is verification. Verification happens in the tiny places earlier hours ignored. You keep your word at a size mortals can carry. You end a conversation cleanly so tomorrow doesn't inherit a tangle. You let desire speak in a grammar that includes commas and pauses instead of subpoenas. You make an appointment with repair before resentment files a case. She watches. The standard climbs into her bones without argument. She starts measuring opportunities by the question, will this keep me whole? She starts measuring attention by the question, will this return what it borrows? She starts measuring closeness by the question, can two sovereignties breathe here without paying fees? Because of your standard, she remembers her own. Others may attempt to compete for her gaze with spectacle. Spectacle is impressive, the way lightning is. But lightning asks for cleanup. Your standard is like the steady current beneath a city, unseen, indispensable, exact. It powers kitchens where kindness cooks, and libraries where wisdom whispers, and streetlights where safety glows at human height. Around that current, urgency loses its glamour. She learns to tell the difference between pressure that performs love and precision that protects it. Precision is not cold. It is devotion in working clothes. There is a counsel inside her that meets when no one else is present. The counsel carries old minutes from moments when she lost pieces of herself to keep someone else's myth warm, when she diluted truth so laughter wouldn't die, when she turned no into a maze to avoid being punished for clarity. Your standard answers that counsel without speech. It makes waste of the old motions. She does not have to litigate her own worth anymore. The case is closed because the conditions in your presence make the verdict obvious. Dignity is not negotiable here. Safety is not a coupon here. Joy is not a performance here. With the case closed, her energy returns to the work of living. Do not underestimate how radical this is. To set a standard is to modify the weather. After a while, you can tell what time it is by the way the light moves across a floor. In the light you keep, she can tell when to speak and when to listen without consulting fear. She can tell when to approach and when to wait without consulting pride. She can tell when to step back and let the day be sufficient without consulting shame. Standards reduce the cost of discernment, and reduced cost is the true luxury most souls are secretly starving for. Your standard does not harden the world, it softens it where softness is courage. It is not punitive, it is permissive in the oldest sense, permitting what is human to take up its rightful space. That is why her priorities reassemble around you without fanfare. The schedule becomes a garden again. Meetings that had become performances become conversations. Goals that had become disguises become offerings. Even ambition becomes benevolent, trimmed of panic and rooted in service. You did not issue memos to make this happen. You simply refuse to move the north for applause. If there is a practice worth guarding, it is this. Keep your measures visible, near limits before anyone has to discover them by bruise. Publish your yes at a speed comprehension can keep. Decline what would win the hour and wound the day. Let your apology be a building permit for changed behavior, not a confetti cannon for remorse. A standard is strongest when it is legible. Legibility is mercy for both of you. It keeps closeness from becoming a puzzle people solve by bleeding. There will be temptations to lower the standard and call it kindness, to raise it and call it excellence, to weaponize it and call it leadership. Resist all three. Kindness without clarity breeds confusion. Excellence without humility breeds theater. Leadership without service breeds extraction. Your work is simpler and more durable. Remain recognizable to yourself across rooms, and let that recognizability be a harbor. In a harbor, ships do not compete. They rest, refuel, repair, and choose their next true voyage. You are that harbor. She knows it because her life functions better in your weather than outside of it. In time, she will stop trying to explain why you are first. The sentence becomes too small for the experience it is trying to hold. She will simply live according to the measure you made rememberable. She will place her chair to face faces instead of doors that used to demand attention. She will answer messages at the size of the bond, not the size of her insecurity. She will say no in a way that leaves tomorrow available and yes in a way that remains true after sleep. And when someone asks what changed, she may shrug and say, "I met a man whose standard made me remember my own." That is the quiet coronation of the chosen ones, not in headlines but in households where a soul reorders its agenda to keep what keeps it whole. Chosen one, the world keeps setting up arenas and handing out jerseys, inviting you to sprint in circles for trophies that evaporate by morning. You don't lace the shoes, you lay the keel. While others sharpen elbows, you check bearings. You are not in the race because your work is older than racing. The quiet labor of putting weight in the right places so the vessel does not capsize when admiration changes direction. She feels this before she names it. Something in her that is tired of contests and highlight reels hears the low certainty in your presence, like a harbor bell sounding through fog, and the part of her that has been performing exhale after exhale for an audience finally draws a breath meant for living. Anchoring is not passivity. It is mastery over drift. You do not win attention by taking it hostage. You win it by making it safe to land. Your sentences arrive with the calm of a pilot who knows the runway, who has seen a crosswind or two and still touches down as if the ground were built for arrival. You are not trying to outshine a room. You are steadying it. What you carry is ballast. Quiet practices chosen when no one was watching. Finishing without flourish, so tomorrow inherits clean lines, saying no at the beginning, so resentment doesn't file a claim at the end, asking for clarity before pace, so meaning has a place to stand. Bodies trust ballast. The nervous system recognizes a center of mass and stops bracing for sudden turns. You do not build your value by comparison. Comparison is a theater with expensive tickets. It demands that someone be smaller for someone else to feel large. You decline the script. Your gravity is self-sourced, the result of long agreements kept with yourself. To move at a speed your honesty can keep up with. To let warmth be governed by respect. To refuse the glamour of ambiguity when clarity would feed more people. She notices the refusal. It frees her from choosing you to defeat anyone. She chooses you to stop being drafted by games that never had her name on them. You do not ask her to stand in your light. You offer her a shoreline. Shores don't compete with oceans. They make oceans livable. Anchoring changes what proximity means. When someone anchored comes near, space doesn't shrink. It organizes. The background noise falls below hearing and the signal rises without strain. She finds herself setting down unneeded props. The reflex to charm, the reflex to hedge, the reflex to narrate every move so she will not be misread. Your presence acts like a metronome that dignifies silence and allows words to arrive at a tempo they can survive. In that tempo, attraction stops being a sprint for the next reassurance and becomes a long walk that almost forgets it is moving. You never once asked to be first. You simply hold such a reliable frequency that everything else arranges itself around it without coercion. Anchors are strongest when unseen, and your best work stays below the waterline. You keep faith with the unphotographable. Eating when your body asks instead of turning need into theater. Sleeping when integrity requires it instead of selling exhaustion as passion. Ending the hour before fatigue rewrites your tone. This kind of housekeeping is unglamorous and impossible to counterfeit. She doesn't see the rituals, she feels the result. Edges that are soft without being vague, warmth that is bright without being blinding, steadiness that allows excitement instead of replacing it. The result is a safety that does not sedate, it awakens. Safe here means there is room for risk because the floor won't tilt when truth steps forward. People who live by competition keep a scoreboard in their chest. It clicks and clacks all day, demanding points. You carry a sextant. You chart by stars you did not invent and would not dare move. That is why your yes holds and your no does not bruise. You are not deciding by mood. You are aligning with a map. She watches you consult it without spectacle, and the part of her that has been betrayed by improvised morals unclenches. This is what chosen ones do when they are mature. They do not advertise their anchor. They take responsibility for it. They keep their gravity clean so others are not taxed for staying nearby. Anchoring is felt most in weather. When surprise blows in, you don't pontificate about storms. You shorten sail. You mind the rigging. You keep your voice at a volume that information can use. When euphoria tries to make levitation mandatory, you smile and set a hand on the rail. When doubt comes asking for a referendum on worth, you refuse a trial and offer a chair. She learns by osmosis a finer courage. The courage not to escalate. The courage to reduce a problem to its measurements. The courage to remain useful when admiration would rather turn two humans into theater. You are not background. You are horizon. Always there, quietly defining direction, even when no one is looking straight at you. You will be mistaken, now and then, for indifference by people addicted to spectacle. Let them pass. The ones who are listening with their whole bodies will know the difference. They will recognize the gift you keep giving. A center that holds without holding anyone hostage. She recognizes it. Around you, she stops choosing tactics and starts choosing truths. She stops proving and starts participating. She stops shopping for a crown and starts building a table. And when she calls you the #1 agenda, she is not ranking you on a list. She is admitting that your center is the place where her scattered pieces finally learned how to belong to one life. Chosen one, calendars tell one story and consciences tell another. Most people schedule themselves by noise. Whatever pings the loudest wins. Your presence adjusts the signal. It is not that you demand priority. It is that you restore proportion. When you arrive, her interior switchboard reassigns power. Urgency goes to voicemail. Importance takes the front desk. She feels it first in the small reallocations. The scroll loses its hypnosis. The choreographed busyness that used to pass for purpose releases its grip. She doesn't cancel herself to make room for you. She cancels what was never feeding her. Your frequency exposes counterfeits without accusation. This reordering is not romance dressed as rebellion. It is the return of stewardship. You are not an event to work around. You are a standard that simplifies choices. Because you move at the pace of comprehension, she no longer has to spend energy translating between what she values and what she does. You do not tempt her into grand gestures. You create conditions for clean ones. Clean looks like telling time out loud so hope doesn't have to guess. Clean looks like finishing early enough that gratitude can arrive without exhaustion. Clean looks like letting a good boundary speak once instead of making it perform at every door. She senses your comfort with clean and her days begin to cooperate. Notice how the edges of her day change shape. Morning is not a launchpad for panic anymore. It becomes a place to set intention at a human volume. Midday remembers it is for depth, not for display. Evening stops auditioning for excitement and starts making room for restoration. This is not because you occupy every hour. It is because your example has recalibrated the clock. When you stood in yourself without rushing, you reminded time how to behave. Time, treated this way, becomes generous. It stops billing interest on every delay. It forgives a misstep without turning it into a storyline. She can feel in her bones that presence has returned to being a resource instead of a commodity. Your arrival doesn't reorganize her world into a shrine. It reorganizes it into a studio. Shrines steal freedom. Studios make creation possible. In studio light, she edits out habits built on fear, answering messages at a speed that confuses availability with love, saying yes because no felt too expensive, stacking obligations to avoid listening to longing. She replaces them with practices that keep life solvent, the unhurried reply that contains care, the precise decline that leaves dignity intact, the single promise small enough to keep in all weathers. You did not give her these practices as rules. You modeled them as muscle memory. Memory travels. It escorts behavior to the places it was always meant to go. The shift you cause can be measured by what stops hurting. Decision fatigue loosens. The ache of pretending to be inspired disappears. The headache of managing other people's expectations eases because truth has been told early enough to prevent theater. Even desire changes flavor. It stops acting like a loot box and starts behaving like a harvest. Harvest requires cultivation and patience, and you have both. She mirrors it without trying. Suddenly her yes contains tomorrow. Suddenly her no contains blessing. Suddenly, intimacy is the byproduct of clarity instead of the price paid for confusion. There will be a temptation to narrate this reprioritization as sacrifice, but that would be inaccurate. Sacrifice implies loss to earn worth. What has happened is subtraction to reveal worth. She is not deleting herself to fit your plan. She is deleting noise so that both of you can hear the plan that was already calling her by name. You are not the plan. You are the proof that following one is livable. This proof shows up in how you carry your own hours. You honor the perimeter of your work without making it a fortress. You keep faith with rest without marketing it as a lifestyle. You refuse to make other people's pace your emergency. This refusal is contagious. Around you, she stops volunteering for crises that were born of other people's poor planning. Compassion remains. Chaos loses its glamour. Priorities often reveal themselves at the threshold of interruption. Watch what happens when something unexpected knocks. Instead of scattering, she triages with mercy, because you have taught her that mercy and order can hold hands. She does not resent the detour, she measures it. Is this mine to carry? Is this ours to address? Is this a story trying to hire us as characters? She can ask these questions because your presence has already answered the bigger one. Will I be punished for being exact? No. Exactness is the house rule. And when exactness is legal, altruism doesn't bankrupt anyone. It becomes a joy again. Your presence dethrones spectacle in another way. It teaches her to choose depth over novelty without apology. New used to lure her with the promise of relief from sameness, but sameness was never the problem. Thinness was. Depth does not need fireworks to be alive. It needs continuity. You keep continuity like a gardener keeps soil, turning, feeding, resting, tending without fanfare. She sees how much wonder is recovered when the ground is good, and suddenly the old book, the old friend, the old craft, the old prayer, the old walk around the block are not leftovers, they are loaves. The agenda changes accordingly. Fewer first times, more first fruits. The proof that her priorities have shifted is not in how often she says your name, it is in how seldom she abandons herself. The self-abandonments once disguised as kindness, overextension, overexposure, overexplaining, quietly retire. In their place, she adopts the manners of someone who expects to be well tomorrow. Sleeping before she is heroic, eating before she is empty, telling the small truth before the big lie needs to be invented. These are not romantic acts. They are responsible ones, and they make romance possible without theft. You do not police this. You inspire it by remaining recognizable to yourself across rooms. Call this preparation if you like, not the staging of a performance, but the setting of a table. She clears what doesn't belong. She lays out what does. She saves a seat for mystery without asking it to audition. When you walk in, nothing about the order begs for attention. It simply works. That is the signature of a life that has recentered without drama. In such a life, you are not a demand on her time. You are the reason time has become trustworthy. And when she says you are the #1 agenda, she is not confessing obsession. She is describing architecture. The foundation has been poured, the weight is distributed, the door frames are square, the roof will hold. The house is not a monument to you. It is a home in which both of you can be exact, generous, and unhurried. First things in first place, by choice rather than by force. Chosen one, there's a kind of gaze that collects and there's a kind that returns. You carry the second. You look at a person and they arrive back in their own hands. The feminine has learned by too many lessons how to survive the first kind, how to polish, posture, sidestep, how to answer questions that were really auditions, how to turn her boundaries into puzzles so she wouldn't be punished for keeping them. Those are the games, clever maneuvers around appetites that mistake closeness for conquest. But your gaze is not a net, it is daylight. And daylight has no appetite. Daylight allows the room to admit what is there and to release what never belonged. She notices it before she names it. The micro-calculations go quiet. Her shoulders stop compensating for rooms that prefer performance to presence. The reflex to narrate every feeling so it will not be cross-examined retreats to its rightful size. You are not scanning for angles, you are witnessing essence. Witness changes posture. She doesn't lean forward to sell, nor lean back to protect. She stands as if the floor belonged to both of you. This is where her games start dissolving. Not because you mastered a trick, but because you retired tricks from your own life. There is nothing in your gaze that tries to bargain. Bargaining needs costumes. You arrived as a standard. Standards are more persuasive than strategies. You do not ask her to be honest while you perform invulnerability. You do not require transparency while hiding your own edges behind fog. You publish your edges the way a hard-working map publishes coastlines. Clean, continuous, usable. Where edges are legible, games are expensive. She can feel it in your cadence. The way you give silence a job instead of turning it into a test. The way you let her finish a thought without rushing to rescue. The way your questions do not confiscate her agency. Games cannot survive in oxygen like that. They are built for shallow air and flashing lights. Your presence is a window opened at the right height. The air changes, and with it, the need to dramatize. It matters that your gaze does not devour. Devouring is a hunger with manners. It smiles while it reduces. You do not reduce, you recognize. Recognition is not flattery. It is fidelity to what's in front of you. You have trained your attention to be solvent, to pay fully, and to leave the space unindebted. Solvent attention has no appetite for leverage. That is why her reflexes slowly sheath themselves. The pretend detached becomes genuinely at ease. The coy becomes precise. The witty as armor becomes funny as gift. You are not trying to win a match. You are keeping a room where truth can stay awake without fearing invoice. She has old skills that once felt necessary, withholding to measure safety, mirroring to avoid collision, changing tempo to keep control. Useful once, expensive now. Your steadiness reprices the hour. Safety no longer has to be manufactured by choreography. It is supplied by conditions. You show up when you said you would. You leave the way a hinge likes without slamming. You do not convert her no into a negotiation or her yes into a contract. You do not promote chemistry above consent or sentiment above standards. A nervous system reads these things long before a mind writes a poem about them. It says in the ancient language of breath, put the masks down. There will be no bill. Games always hide a fear that truth alone is not compelling enough to be chosen. You disprove that quietly. You do not accessorize your meaning with intimidation or scarcity. You refuse to move the north for applause. Your gravity is clean. She orients without becoming obedient. The feminine does not want to be conquered. She wants to be met. Meeting requires two intact centers. Your gaze protects hers the way a well-built frame protects glass. With the frame right, the window can be honest about weather. She can say what is so without managing your temperature. She can be undecided without being tried in a court of urgency. She can be tender without being taxed. Attraction, relieved of theater, gains endurance. It stops burning through oxygen to keep its shape. It becomes something like a hearth, warm, governed, useful, able to hold conversation in quiet without switching costumes. This is why the games drop of their own weight. They were scaffolds around a structure that did not trust the load-bearing beams. But your presence carries its own weight. When she rests a truth on it, the truth does not creak. When she rests a boundary on it, the boundary does not splinter. When she rests a longing on it, the longing does not get drafted for service it never volunteered for. Chosen ones do not audition for worth. They maintain atmospheres where worth does not need a microphone. There will still be moments when old reflex turns the lights off and reaches for a script. Trust is muscle memory built over time, not a decree. You do not panic when the room briefly reverts to theater. You keep the lamp at a human height. You let the silence do the heavy lifting. You answer the question she meant instead of the performance she practiced. This is not indulgence, it is skill. You are protecting the conditions under which truth returns. The games end not with a flourish, but with a shrug, like a coat taken off indoors because the temperature's finally right. Your gaze gives another gift that no tactic can reproduce. It makes refusal beautiful. In performative spaces, no becomes a referendum on appeal. In your keeping, no is information. Information improves design. She learns that turning down an hour that does not feed life is not a loss but an alignment. You receive her no without recruiting injury to make her teach it twice. You receive her yes without deputizing it to prove your legend. Every time you do, a piece of theater closes for lack of audience. The stage crew goes home. The venue becomes usable for something better than spectacle. And then without announcement, the playfulness returns, not as strategy but as spirit. Humor arrives without hiding inside sarcasm. Curiosity arrives without borrowing sharpness from fear. Flirtation becomes a bridge instead of a bargaining chip. The feminine is never more luminous than when she's not spending energy on defense. You did not summon that light. You built a room that did not tax it. That is why, in your gaze, she forgets to posture and remembers to be. And being is the only game that ever mattered. Chosen one. Desire has a terrible reputation in rooms where it was asked to carry what integrity refused to build. It learns to rush. It learns to hide. It learns to bargain with chemistry when character won't come to work. In your presence, desire finally sets down its suitcase. It stops lobbying. It stops auditioning. It stops campaigning for outcomes that would only exhaust the morning. It rests, not as sleep, but as right placement.